The Maine coast in November is a study in grays. The sky, the ocean, the bare granite cliffs all seem to blend into one muted canvas. In the small town of South Bristol, population 900, Ellen Price understood these colors better than most. At 67, she had spent her entire life in the white clapboard house on Pemaquid Point, the same house her grandmother had fought to keep during the Great Depression. It sat on a rocky outcropping, defiant against the Atlantic winds, its paint chipped by a century of salt spray. Inside, the floors sloped gently, and every window rattled when the wind blew from the east. To Ellen, it was not merely a house, it was a repository of memory. It held the ghost of her husband, Thomas, who had died of a heart attack in the vegetable garden 10 years prior. It held the echo of her daughter, Sarah, who had moved to Portland years ago and rarely called. It held the only life Ellen had ever known. So when the certified letter arrived from the town hall, she read it standing at her kitchen counter, the kettle whistling unnoticed behind her, and felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. The letter was not a request. It was a notification. The property at 12 Lighthouse Road had been selected for inclusion in the Shoreline Development Project, a luxury resort and spa. The town needed the tax revenue. Her house would be demolished by spring. Ellen read the words 3 times, waiting for them to make sense. They never did. The public hearing was held in the basement of the Congregational Church, as town hall was too small to accommodate the crowd. Ellen sat in the 3rd row, wearing her good wool coat, the one she reserved for funerals. Around her, neighbors she had known for decades shifted uncomfortably in folding chairs. The room was thick with the smell of coffee and anxiety. On a dais at the front sat the select board, 3 local men Ellen had watched grow from boys to grandfathers. Beside them, in a sharply pressed suit that seemed to mock the casual setting, sat a stranger. He was introduced as Marcus Webb, project manager for Shoreline Development, a corporation based in Boston. Marcus was young, perhaps 40, with the easy confidence of a man who had never been told no. He spoke about jobs, about tax revenue, about putting South Bristol on the map. He used words like revitalization and opportunity. He showed renderings of a gleaming hotel with a spa and a restaurant where the old fish processing plant used to be. The crowd listened in silence. When he finished, he opened the floor for questions. An old fisherman asked about access to the wharf. A shop owner asked about construction traffic. Ellen waited. When it was her turn, she stood up slowly, her knees aching from the cold. "Mr. Webb," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "where am I supposed to go?" Marcus Webb smiled a practiced smile. "Mrs. Price, the state has a very fair relocation assistance program. I'm sure we can find you a nice apartment in town." Ellen stared at him. An apartment. After 67 years, she was being offered an apartment. She sat down without another word. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in attrition. Ellen learned that the fair relocation assistance amounted to a modest check that would barely cover a year's rent. She learned that her property, assessed by the town at $180,000, was being valued at $145,000 for the taking. She learned that Marcus Webb's company had done this before in 5 other small towns along the eastern seaboard. A quick online search at the library revealed lawsuits, complaints, and accusations of bullying tactics. But the lawsuits had all been settled out of court. The complaints had gone nowhere. The towns, starved for revenue, had ultimately welcomed the bulldozers. Ellen tried calling a lawyer. The first one, in Bath, quoted her a $5,000 retainer just to look at the paperwork. The second, in Portland, said he did not take eminent domain cases because they were too time-consuming against corporate counsel. The third never called back. She called her daughter, Sarah. The conversation was brief, strained. "Mom, maybe it's for the best. That house is too big for you. You could move closer to me." Ellen hung up and stared at the photograph of Thomas on the mantel. He had built her a window seat in the living room, right where the light was best for reading. She could still see his pencil marks on the wood. She could still smell his coffee in the morning. They wanted to turn that into a spa. December brought the first real snow. Ellen was in her garden, digging up the last of the potatoes, when a black SUV with Massachusetts plates pulled up to her mailbox. Marcus Webb stepped out, bundled in a long wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly Social Security check. He walked up the path, stepping carefully around the frozen mud. "Mrs. Price," he called out, his breath forming small clouds. "I was in the area. Thought I'd check in personally." Ellen did not stop digging. "I'm busy, Mr. Webb." He stood at the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets. "I understand this is difficult. But the town has voted. The project is moving forward. I'm here to offer you a little incentive to sign the paperwork early. Saves everyone the headache of legal fees." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. An additional $10,000 on top of the state assessment. "If you sign by Friday." Ellen straightened up, the cold dirt caked on her gloves. She looked at him, at his polished shoes, his perfect hair, his patient smile. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived 2 world wars and the Depression without ever selling this land. "Get off my property, Mr. Webb." The smile flickered, just for a second. "Mrs. Price, I'm trying to be reasonable here." "Get off my property," she repeated, her voice louder than she intended. Marcus Webb shrugged, replaced the envelope in his pocket, and walked back to his SUV. As he drove away, Ellen watched the taillights disappear down the winding road. She felt something she had not felt in years. Not grief, not fear. Something else. That night, Ellen could not sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, a stack of old gardening books spread before her. Thomas had been a high school science teacher before he retired. His books still lined the shelves in the spare bedroom. She pulled down a worn volume on botany, its pages yellowed and brittle. She read about defensive compounds in plants, how certain species produce toxins to ward off herbivores. It was purely academic interest, she told herself. She was not planning anything. She was simply remembering. The next morning, she drove to a greenhouse in Damariscotta and bought seeds for several varieties of ornamental plants. The young woman at the register made small talk about spring planting. Ellen smiled her sweet old lady smile and paid in cash. Back home, she cleared a small, hidden patch of garden behind the toolshed, far from the road, where no one would think to look. She planted the seeds carefully, watering them with the same devotion she had once given to Thomas's tomatoes. She did not know why she was doing it. Or perhaps she did, but she was not ready to admit it to herself. She simply waited. Winter passed. The snow melted. Ellen's hidden garden began to sprout. She tended it daily, learning the plants, their cycles, their properties. She read everything she could find online, using the library's public computers. She learned that some common garden plants contain compounds that could be harmful if ingested in large quantities. She learned about symptoms that mimicked natural illnesses. She filed the information away, telling herself it was just curiosity. In March, another letter arrived. The town had set a final deadline: vacate by June 1st. After that, the sheriff would be authorized to remove her. Ellen folded the letter neatly and placed it in a drawer with the others. Then she walked out to her garden and inspected the plants. They were healthy. She wondered what Thomas would think of her now. She wondered what she thought of herself. But the house was still there, and the wind was still blowing, and she was still standing on the land her grandmother had saved. That had to mean something. April brought an unexpected visitor. Ellen was on her porch, shelling peas, when a gray sedan pulled up. A woman got out, mid-40s, sharp eyes, no-nonsense walk. She held up a badge. "Mrs. Price?" "Detective Laura Bates, Maine State Police. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" Ellen's heart skipped, but her face remained placid. "Of course, Detective. Would you like some lemonade?" Laura Bates declined the lemonade but accepted a seat on the porch swing. She explained that she was conducting a routine inquiry into the shoreline development project. There had been complaints from other towns. Ellen listened, her hands steady as she continued shelling peas. "I'm not sure how I can help, Detective. I'm just a stubborn old woman who won't sell her house." Laura Bates studied her for a long moment. "Mr. Webb has received some threatening letters recently. Anonymous. Postmarked from Wiscasset." Ellen smiled. "Wiscasset is 20 minutes away. Anyone could mail a letter from Wiscasset." The detective nodded slowly. "True. But the letters mentioned specific details about Mr. Webb's schedule. Details that aren't public." Ellen shrugged. "I wouldn't know anything about that, Detective. I barely know Mr. Webb." Laura Bates stood to leave. "If you hear anything, Mrs. Price, please call." After she drove away, Ellen went inside and washed her hands. She realized she had been foolish. She would not make that mistake again. May was warm and bright. Ellen's garden flourished, a tangle of colorful blooms that neighbors admired from the road. She spent hours among the plants, weeding, watering, thinking. She thought about her grandmother, about Thomas, about the life she had built in this place. She thought about Marcus Webb and his plans. She thought about justice, and what it meant when the law failed to protect the powerless. On May 15th, the South Bristol Historical Society held its annual bake sale. Ellen attended, as she always did, carrying a basket of her famous molasses cookies. Marcus Webb was there too, shaking hands, playing the role of the benevolent developer. Ellen watched him from across the room, noting how he accepted a cup of coffee from one of the volunteers. She observed his habits, his routines, but did nothing. A few days later, she drove to the Shoreline Development Field office in Wiscasset, posing as a curious local. She asked about the project timeline, about the amenities. The receptionist, a chatty young woman, mentioned that Mr. Webb had a favorite cafe in Damariscotta where he stopped every morning. Ellen thanked her and left. She still did not know what she was going to do. The last week of May was tense. Ellen baked cookies, dozens of them, her famous recipe. She also spent time in her hidden garden, harvesting a few plants she had been watching. She did not process them. She did not prepare anything. She simply held them in her hands and thought about what they represented. On May 28th, she drove to Damariscotta. She parked near the cafe, watching as Marcus Webb's black SUV pulled into the lot at 7:45 a.m. She waited until he went inside, then she approached his vehicle. She slipped a small bag of cookies under the windshield wiper, with a handwritten note, a token of appreciation from a South Bristol resident. "Hope you'll change your mind about our town." Then she walked away, heart pounding, and drove home. She did not see him find the cookies. She did not know if he ate them. But the next day, she heard the news. Marcus Webb had been hospitalized with severe gastrointestinal distress. Food poisoning, the initial report said. He was in stable condition. Ellen felt a complicated mixture of relief and dread. She had not actually done anything, had she? The cookies were just cookies. Weren't they? The news of Marcus Webb's illness spread through South Bristol like wildfire. Some whispered about bad clams. Others wondered if the development was cursed. Ellen listened in silence at the post office, at the grocery store, at the library. She went about her business as usual. But on June 2nd, 2 days after the eviction deadline had passed, another letter arrived. This one was not from the town. It was from Shoreline Development's legal department. They were extending the deadline. Temporarily. Due to unforeseen circumstances. Ellen read the letter and felt her stomach tighten. Then she heard the car in the driveway. It was Detective Laura Bates again. This time, she did not ask for lemonade. "Mrs. Price, I need you to come with me to the station. We have some questions about Mr. Webb's illness." Ellen blinked innocently. "I thought it was food poisoning, Detective." Laura Bates's eyes were hard. "It's not food poisoning anymore. Mr. Webb's condition has worsened. The doctors are running tests." Ellen nodded slowly. "I'll get my coat." The interview room at the Wiscasset police station was small and windowless. Ellen sat across from Laura Bates and a younger officer. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Mrs. Price, we have a witness who saw you near Mr. Webb's vehicle on the morning of May 28th. At the cafe in Damariscotta." Ellen folded her hands on the table. "I was in Damariscotta that morning. I go there often. The hardware store has better prices." Laura Bates leaned forward. "You placed something on his windshield." "A bag." "Cookies," Ellen said calmly. "I left him cookies. With a note. I wanted to apologize for our last conversation. I thought maybe a kind gesture would." She trailed off. "The cookies were tested, Mrs. Price. They contained traces of a compound found in certain ornamental plants. It can be toxic in large quantities." Ellen's face registered genuine surprise. "Toxic? From my garden?" "I have those plants, yes, but I would never. I mean, how would that even get into cookies? I bake with flour, sugar, butter. Nothing from the garden." Laura Bates studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "That's what we're trying to determine." The investigation stretched into July. Ellen's garden was examined, her home was searched, her computer was seized. The police found her books on botany, her hidden patch of plants, her notes on their properties. They found everything. Ellen did not confess. She said she was a gardener, a lifelong learner. She said the books were for knowledge, not action. She said she had no idea how any toxin could have ended up in the cookies. The prosecutor presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, motive, means, opportunity. Ellen's lawyer argued that there was no direct proof of intent. The plants grew naturally. Contamination could have been accidental. Cross-contamination in the kitchen. A stray leaf blown by the wind. The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they could not agree on intent beyond a reasonable doubt. Ellen was acquitted of all charges. As she walked out of the courthouse a free woman, she caught a glimpse of Detective Laura Bates in the hallway. Their eyes met. Laura's expression was unreadable. Ellen turned away and walked into the gray Maine afternoon. Ellen Price returned to South Bristol in the late summer. The shoreline development project had collapsed after Marcus Webb's illness and the subsequent legal battles. Investors had pulled out. The town was back to square one. Ellen's house was still standing, though it needed repairs. The garden was overgrown but alive. She stood on the porch, looking out at the gray Atlantic, and felt the wind on her face. She had lost months of her life to anxiety and suspicion. She had lost the trust of some neighbors. She had lost the quiet anonymity of old age. But she had kept the house. Sarah, her daughter, had visited her during the trial, and they were slowly rebuilding their relationship. Ellen walked around back, to the hidden patch behind the toolshed. The plants were still there, their flowers bright against the weathered wood. She looked at them for a long time. Then she took out her gardening gloves and began to dig. One by one, she removed the plants, placing them in a pile to be composted. She was not erasing evidence. She was making a choice. The house was hers. The land was hers. And she would tend it differently from now on. Some battles, she realized, are won not by fighting, but by enduring. She went inside to call her daughter.